Welcome to The Patient Physician. My name is Paul Smith, and I am joined today by my co-host, Chris Fulbright.
Hey, Paul, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. Did you have a good Labor Day weekend?
We did. An extra day. It is funny. One extra day makes a world of difference. And so we had a good time relaxing. What'd you do?
About the same, just a little
Yeah.
bit less work than normal. But nonetheless, yes, it is nice to have an extra day and feel like you are living your life. In fact, our next guest on The Patient Physician is Dr. Trevor Cabrera. And he is one that is, I would think, calling his own shots and living the life that he wants to live. He has a blog that he goes by the Nomadic Pediatrician, and you can find him at the Nomadic-Pediatrician.com. But Trevor is an American board certified pediatrician with a passion for travel, culture, and the art of medicine, which I love this because I want to hear more about that. But Trevor was born and raised in Roseville, California. He earned his Bachelor of Science with a minor in healthcare and social issues from the University of California in San Diego. And driven by a love for languages and global exploration, he moved to Florence, Italy after college, earning his certification in teaching English as a foreign language. Now, although job opportunities abroad proved limited for non-EU citizens at the time, the international experience fueled his desire to pursue a career in medicine. Trevor came back and attended Tulane University School of Medicine in New Orleans, where he earned his MD and cultivated a strong interest in culinary medicine. I'd like to talk more about this one too, because my oldest is very interested in this as well. This is an emerging field focused on using food and nutrition as tools for improving health. He went on to complete his residency in general pediatrics at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston, where he was drawn to the high stakes of emotionally complex environments of pediatric oncology, the pediatric ICU, emergency medicine, and neonatology. Is you sure there wasn't room to add one more thing in there? I mean, at this point, but continuing on and where he's at now, unsure of which subspecialty to pursue and eager to grow both personally and professionally, Trevor chose to work as a full-time locum tenens physician, traveling doctor who steps into temporary roles across a variety of healthcare settings. This lifestyle allowed him to deepen his medical skills while exploring diverse approaches to pediatric care across the U.S. And in 2023, Trevor returned back to formal training to pursue a neonatal-perinatal medicine fellowship, reaffirming his commitment to one of the most critical and rewarding fields within pediatrics. Through his long journey, he shares insights and experiences on his blog, The Nomadic Pediatrician, blending storytelling, clinical wisdom, and global perspective on modern medicine. Welcome to the show, Dr. Trevor Cabrera.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks, Chris. I'm so excited to be here. Appreciate you guys having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. Now, I want to start off by asking you, if someone met you outside of this experience, outside of the hospital, would they first notice the doctor, the traveler, or the storyteller?
They would most likely notice, and I think a lot of my friends in Kansas City and in Missouri know me this way, as basically a semi-professional country line dancer, actually. And, it's funny because my group that I do go country line dancing with didn't know for months what I do during the daytime because I kind of kept it a secret. So all to be said, maybe you'd know me as the traveler and maybe just as a high energy existence. But, the medicine part that has become a large part of my life and a large part of what defines myself, just like a lot of my friends that are physicians, is something that I think outside of it, I don't get to talk a whole lot about. So maybe somewhere in between, I guess I'd say.
Well, we could go a whole different direction with the line dancing thing, but we're going to just stay on this one for now. So if you can, let's just take us back to what first inspired you to go into medicine, because you graduate college, you go overseas to pursue one interest, come back pursuing a different one.
It's been an interesting journey. I think that a lot of people will do what is close to them. And the reason that you choose to do that, whether you stay in line with comfort or you find other reasons or passions or interests to do that is always really interesting to me. So actually, to go really far back, so my dad was a cardiologist and my mom's a pharmacist. So I came from a world of seeing and understanding healthcare, at least, by like secondhand from what they would tell me. In high school, I worked in my dad's office. He was a cardiologist again, and in his office, that was a couple summers in high school. At the time, I remember meeting someone that said to me, "Hey, your dad saved my life. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him." And that was a really powerful kind of thing. And in school, I always excelled in sciences, and so it made sense in undergrad education to really focus on that. So that's what led to my major in biology. And during that time, it was kind of interesting. I had taken a bunch of Spanish in elementary school, and I tested out of needing to take Spanish in college, actually, when I did an AP Spanish test in like my junior year in high school. And so I didn't have a formal language requirement, but I'd always been interested in other languages. At the time, I was a pharmacy technician, and I was in a pretty diverse area in San Diego. It's where I went to college. And it was really cool to be able to know a little bit of how to communicate with people of every different culture and different background. And so that led me to studying Italian for actually about a year and a half in undergrad. And then after that, I thought, hey, I do actually think that the medicine route had been on the mind, but it was one of those things of like, I should try to explore a little bit more outside of that. And so back in the time I did this, 2011 to 2013, it was considered non-traditional, quote, to take off a gap between undergraduate and graduate education. And that will probably allude and kind of be a segue to a lot of things we can talk about today. But at the time, it was really not typical for people to do that. Think about decades ago, you chose a profession, you chose a career, you just did it. And that was it. There was no questions asked. I think the question of how much you cared about it or passionate about it changed over time. And there are people that ended up in certain jobs just because that's what they did. It was thought of as this is the only job I'm going to do. So for me, all to be said that at the time, I had decided to do this. The original plan, again, was to stay in Italy for a full year or so, become fluent in Italian, and then come back and figure things out. When I came back a little bit early, and had to figure out kind of my life at the time, it was a thought that, hey, I still have the energy at the time. I still have the energy to go to school. I should pull the trigger now. Otherwise, I'm not going to go back and do it. And so I came back from Italy within a couple months after being there. And this is after I graduated undergrad and then applied to med school the next year. And something I'd add to that is during that time, kind of in that same train of thought, I actually studied Russian for a year also before going to med school. And all these things.
Sure, why not? Let's just throw it in another language, right?
Exactly. And they all contributed to, over the years, I've come to really have an appreciation and understand what I was really seeking was the ability to really communicate with people on a much deeper level. And those were some of the foundations of like why I went into medicine, to save people, to communicate with people. And over the years, that's changed. But I have to say that those experiences and taking that gap and taking the time to focus and learn about communication on a literal level and in between the lines level really affected who I am now. And so that's how I ended up on that path. I ended up applying to med school, and I got into med school in New Orleans, and that was kind of it. It kind of just set me on that direction. Yeah.
So would you say that being in Florence, because as I was kind of reading through your bio, it seemed like being there, something happened in Florence that made you kind of come back to medicine. But it sounds like maybe because of your family history, medicine was never really fully off the table. Maybe it was always back there.
It was never fully off the table. I think that was the bigger thing. And I think with the time that I spent away, which also I think connects with where I took a gap between my residency and fellowship, I did it to be sure that that was the path that I wanted to take. And it really more so, if you tried to run away from medicine, it pushed you back. And when I talk to younger people now, when I talk to college kids, high school, college, people that haven't quite applied to medical school yet, I'll be totally honest with you. I try to talk them out of it. And the reason for me has always been, people say, why would you do that? And I say very simply, if I can talk you out of it, you're not cut out for this. And that's just kind of what happened. And so I think for me, it was partially to see like if I could talk myself out of going this way. And then when I discovered, hey, no, this is what you want, it kind of guided me back, you know. So it's like when you're looking at a menu and you're stuck between two different great options, and you ask somebody for their suggestion, they'd say option B, and then it makes you understand, oh wait, you want option A. So I think that was the bigger part that contributed to it. But I would say that what I looked for in med school and the way that I saw myself going forward was largely affected by a lot of things in Italy, and primarily that being that I was in an environment where I wasn't the one speaking the majority language. I was in a different, uncomfortable environment. And if nothing else, I think that was the spearhead for putting myself in uncomfortable or challenging situations. Because really up until that point, you know, high school, elementary school, high school, college, you just have to do the things. But going to the path of medicine is the first time that you're really going to push yourself beyond your comfort and outside of your limitations. So I think
where are your parents in all of this? Are they, you know, especially your dad being a physician, are they having any influence, or are you having any conversations with them about it?
Yeah, so my mom was always kind of supportive of what I wanted to do, and I think another reason that my life went the way it did was my dad passed away in 2010 when I was a junior
Sorry to
in
hear that.
college. And you know, it happens. And one of these days, I'm going to write a book, and I'll send it to you guys, where I can trace every single thing back to that moment or when he died, because I've actually written down what I've done every day for the last 15 years. Very interestingly, not like a blog, not like a diary, but like a, you know, XYZ happened very bluntly. And I think that ties back to that. So my dad passed away in 2010. I graduated college in 2011. And so really, and I think about that a lot, you know, he never saw me as I see myself and as I am today. And I think that might have been, you know, a big reason I went into medicine, was to kind of find more of that alignment with who he was or who he had been. But very interestingly, I never really got to see that or experience that, since he wasn't here for it. But that being said, you know, not to focus on that sad part, but it has completely changed my life. And I thought about it the other day. I mean, it was the 15th anniversary of him passing in May. And I thought about where I'm at and everything that I've been through that we're going to talk about today. And it's just like, none of this would have happened. So, you know, a side note that, again, millions of segues we could take things that we don't need to, but it's helped me to really think about that. You know, the cliche, things happen for a reason. You know, I don't know that I completely say that, but I would say that things happen. And then when you connect the dots looking backwards, I mean, it's a really cool thing to do. So yeah, I think that, you know, for him, you know, I think that he would have been surprised at where I've gone, but at the same time, you know, I don't know another way to say it, but if he had not passed away, I would not have ended up doing any of the things I've done. And so the ripples in that regard have just been wild.
Again, I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm glad that we're not on video for a lot of this stuff, because I don't know, you could tell my eyes started to like water up and tear up, because your story is very similar. I didn't know that coming into this, obviously, but you know, my dad passed away in my last semester of college as well. So he didn't get to see me graduate. He was there to drop me off the very first semester of college. So, you know, but like you, I feel like I tried to foster that, you know, loss, and you know, that could have just been ongoing sadness of, you know, hey, it's not part of it, but to try to use that as a footing, if you will, to help me see the important things to pursue in life, and you know, really try to do the things that I think would make him proud. So it seems like you're trying to do the very same thing, and obviously to a much better degree than I ever did. But you know, congratulations to you on that. And I'll just say, not knowing your father, I'll just say, I'm sure he'd be very proud of you.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. I really appreciate that sentiment.
So take us to Tulane. You're in medical school now, and
Yeah, and I would start by saying too, I think about it so often and just think about the path. When I applied to medical school, I think I applied to something like 30 med schools. Maybe more, I don't remember at the time. And I only got into Tulane in New Orleans. I had got waitlisted at UC Davis, which would have been right down the street from where I grew up. And up until that point, I'd never left California. And I think that's important because I think for everybody, and at whatever stage you are in your life, I always encourage people, especially that go through medical training, to leave. Like, you should always go somewhere else, even if you are at like an undergrad that has a great med school, or a med school that has a great residency, or XYZ. I always tell my trainees that I work with to go somewhere else. I had a resident that asked me the other day, hey, should I stay here for fellowship? And I said, no, you should leave. Even if you like the fellowship there and it's a great place, there's so much that comes and so much depth that comes from seeing and experiencing different things. So all to be said, when I ended up going to New Orleans, it blew open a whole bunch of doors I didn't ever expect. Tulane University is one of the few schools of medicine, a few programs in the country that allows people to do a 4-year MD/Master's in Public Health program. So actually, I was accepted there as a dual trainee. And so over the 4 years, I would have ended up graduating with an MD, MPH. Most training programs, most universities allow for you to do a master's within your medical school training, but it requires taking a separate year. You can do an MBA, Master's of Public Health, all those things. And I actually decided to not continue with my Master's of Public Health when I got in, because it wasn't something I saw myself using, but it was a big reason that attracted me to the school in the first place. That being said, I didn't realize that when I got down there, how it was just going to be just a different world entirely. If you've never been to New Orleans, I mean, it's a different culture, which people will know about. But when you really get your feet on the ground, you see that it's a different structure of people in general. The community there and the way that people are is so different. And one big part of that is, unfortunately, has really bad socioeconomic disparities. There's a lot of people that never really make it past the 6th or 7th grade education. And so really what that comes to is, when you take a city like that already and you hit it with something like Hurricane Katrina, which is like over 20 years now, right? You create a world and you create a place that's unlike any other city in the country. So what that means and what it gets to is, during med school, we would get a couple of weeks off every year to enjoy Mardi Gras. During med school, there were times where I had worked with faculty that during Hurricane Katrina had gone out into the street to do medicine on the ground without technology, without labs. They would go with a stethoscope and they would listen to people on the streets. So I had a very different, non-sterile upbringing in the world of medicine. And part of that was there was an internal medicine doctor that had been there for years. And I think he had trained at Emory. I want to say maybe Timothy Harlan might be his name. I could be completely wrong with that. But I know that he had this idea that doctors don't know enough about nutrition. And that really, if you have somebody that goes to you as a patient and you're needing some help with your cholesterol, your weight, whatever. I mean, think about it. You and I have gone to the doctor and they say, eat healthier. And we say, what does that mean? And they say, eat more vegetables. Or, okay, fine. What else? Eat less fast food. Well, when you take someone that makes minimum wage, is working 50 hours a week, that lives in a poor area in New Orleans, that doesn't know what kale is, that lives in an area that is essentially a food desert, and the nearest grocery store is 2 or 3 miles away, but they don't have transportation and they can't read because they didn't graduate 7th grade, it changes the way that you practice medicine. It changes the way that you confront humanity. And so he came up with this concept of culinary medicine. And the idea was to use food as medicine. So I can't say I'm as well versed in some of the intricacies anymore, but during the time I was there, this program had started, and it started out of the cafeteria at the medical school. And within the time I was there, the Whole Foods in the area actually ended up sponsoring a program, and a whole kitchen was built in the back of that Whole Foods. It is now the Goldring Center of Culinary Medicine, I believe, or something along those lines. I mean, it was full blown. We had a chef that came down, some dietitians from Johnson & Wales University, culinary school in Providence, Rhode Island. And instead of saying something like, hey, you need to eat more vegetables, I was able to, and I was trained to take a stereotypical New Orleanian dish like red beans and rice, a shrimp etouffee, and with modifications to it, make it under 500 calories for a diabetic. And it was really those kind of nuances with understanding those things. And I've always been a big fan of cooking. And so that was a really cool way to be able to use those things and combine them. And to this day, I still use them. And when I was a pediatrician, more, full time and before specializing in what I do now, I was able to use this on a day-to-day talking to families. And I think that the world is going that direction. There's a place for thinking about what we used to call complementary alternative medicine, or thinking about the fact that not everything is just Western medicine. I don't like the word holistic because by definition, pediatrics is holistic, but in the world outside of that and adult medicine, using food like this would be part of what contributes to the idea of holistic practice. And fun fact, while I'm at it, because of that, we had an exchange with that Johnson Wales School in Rhode Island. And so I actually got to spend a full month at culinary school as a medical student. And, I was supposed to go and take dietetic classes, obviously, but I did things like take wine class at 9 a.m. and
Wine class?
didn't hate that.
That's when the semi-professional line dancing started.
Exactly,
Yeah.
So these things all kind of weave in, and I think it's really I think these are, when you ask me point blank about them, it's fascinating for me to introspectively or retrospectively digest it, but they have subconsciously just affected so much of how I just talk to people. So that's one of the big things that came from being there. And one thing that I would say, this is a direct full circle to where I'm at now. When I was in medical school, I did extra electives in end of life and hospice and palliative care. We had a whole class that was completely optional that I took on it. I was so interested in some of these really critical situations that outside of med school, I even took a chaplaincy class, or administrative of the sick course, and got some sort of certificate from that. At the time, I didn't know it was for chaplains, and so I showed up, and it's all chaplains and this awkward med student sitting there. But it has been really useful because it's really increased my ability to deliver bad news. And so all those things being said, at the time, actually, I had always thought I wanted to do pediatrics, and kind of to get to that question of why pediatrics, one of the big things that played into it, full circle, was my interest in communication. I had gotten to a point where now I've learned how to talk about culinary medicine. I've learned a lot about end of life, delivering bad news and walking people through a different gauntlet, so to speak. But I had always had that interest in language, right? And, I like that we started with that. Now we're talking, I speak Spanish at this point in time. I spoke Italian. My Russian had been a little bit better. And pediatrics is fascinating, right? Because if you or I go to the doctor, we probably hear about 20% of what they tell us to do. It's just reality. It goes in one ear, and sometimes, even if it's words we understand and we're non-medical, kind of goes out the other ear. But when you are taking your child to the doctor, and you can maybe attest or not to this, you hear a lot more of what the provider's telling you because it's your child. And it's really interesting that that's the case. And so I went into pediatrics because I had to be particularly careful with my word choice. It was a different language to learn how to work with children, but also learn how to work with children's parents. And so those are a couple of things that pushed me that way. Now, there's obviously other reasons for pediatrics. I mean, the innocent, the clean slate thing. You can't really blame a child for making decisions. It's really not up to them. And so those are the reasons I went that way. But, all of those parts of Tulane, all those parts of language in Italy that you mentioned were reasons that kind of led me in that path.
So just to come back to the culinary portion, I don't know the answer to this, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot on nutrition and food through the just the traditional medical training route, right? So this was extra for you to learn. Do you think that it was impactful enough that it should be included, at least a portion of that, for all physicians going through medical school?
Yeah. So this was 2013, right? The idea had been started there a couple years before that. I've lost count, but in the last decade, our curriculum has been sent out all over the country. Scores of facilities, programs. Actually, when I was a pediatric resident in Houston, I asked about that. I had heard about a teaching kitchen at the School of Public Health in Houston. And someone had talked to us about it, and I said, hey, I wonder if that's related, or did you know we did that in New Orleans? And then I had been told, and I never looked into the validity of this, but I'd been told that the curriculum came from us. So I think, New Orleans being a city of food was a big reason. It was a good place to flagship this. But from my understanding, the concept has been rolled out all over the country. We've swung certain ways in medicine over the last 10, 15 years where we know you can't just treat things with medication, and it's not just pharmacology. Your lifestyle is important. And some people, I think, distance themselves from Western medicine, and I unfortunately have to deal with that a lot in my world now, which we don't have to get into those parts. But a lot of people have distanced or have had, I guess, ambiguous thoughts or uncertainty towards trusting Western medicine, thinking that it is all pushing a certain dogma, and really that's evolved. Really now, everything I do is by definition, like I said, holistic. So the idea of using food as medicine, it's inevitably something that is taking over, and it is inevitably something that people are understanding they have to know about. So yeah, it's great. More and more people are learning about it, and I've actually noticed too, when I've talked to some people, I think in general, more people from a health standpoint, as a general American culture, realize that there's nuances to what health means and nuances to what that means in the particularly food. I think people realize, yeah, we got to eat more vegetables, and that's an answer we knew 20 years ago. But now I think more and more people are kind of diving into like how you break that down. And so to answer the community need for that, medical providers are starting, I think, to catch up. I mean, it's great to have a registered dietitian. I couldn't do my job at all without them. But we unfortunately aren't lucky enough to always have one with us. So I think that, to take good care of your patients, you need to do that. And this is speaking outside of the pediatric world, but, with how adult medicine has changed with the changes in, health reimbursement and looking at insurance and all these other large stacked ideas that people argue about every day. I mean, the reality is an insurance company, if they're going to change the way they reimburse a doctor, if it's like taking good care of your patient, you're going to have to know these nuances. It's just like the reality of making people better.
Paul, do you remember on our podcast before, we had a doctor talk about starting small farms or plots of vegetables outside of the hospital and then bringing people in from the community once a month? Because Trevor, it's just what you were describing. It's eat vegetables, do things. One, if they live in an area that they don't have ground, they don't have yard, they don't have, they live in the city, they can't go grow their own stuff.
Yeah, ACGME, and I don't remember the physician, but she was one of the faculty members, and the community was small enough.
Yeah, somewhere up north.
They actually just went out into the community and brought people that live there into this area, and kind of, it was a way for them to collaborate, meet the people in the community on a one-on-one basis, and then also kind of have this garden area. So
teach them how to cook and stuff, which is interesting, Trevor, because you're one of your favorite blogs, right, guys? If you're all listening, the Nomadic Pediatrician, go to it. He has unbelievable blogs. But it's funny you talked about food, because as I looked through it, one of the one that caught me is you dressed like a chef. You were in there, but it's May 6th, 2025. So if y'all are going through, scrolling through, he's got a bunch of them. It's fantastic. But it's because you and I've visited for a few years now. You've had this freedom about you to make what we would call non-traditional decisions, gap years, locums. I'm going to continue to live like this, and I'm going to pay off all my students. Like, we can go into all these decisions that you made. Travel to Italy. I'm going to go a different path. I'm going to do it again. Maybe I don't like the way they're treating me here. I have the right and the freedom to move. Where a lot of physicians we've met with, that's the path. That's the treadmill they decided to get on when they were 15, 16, 17, or their parents chose that path. And now they're going to march that out until retirement, until whatever, right? But there's a line you wrote in this first paragraph on May 6th. It says, it was towards the end of my first day of fellowship when my attending and unit director sat me down along with our rotating pediatric residents to give us an orientation to the unit and the month starting. There are guidelines and there are policies. Policies have to be followed, but guidelines are just recommendations. And I've always wondered, that line for you seems to maybe have just planted a seed within you, because I love when you and I get to talk because there's this freedom about you, and you're like, I'm going to start a business. I'm going to go over here. By the way, I'm Chris. Yes, last time we talked, I was in Wisconsin, and now I'm in Texas, and now I'm back over here. And by the way, when I was there, I wasn't completely focused on medicine. I learned how to do right? Cooking, food, a new language, dancing, good wine, right? You always have this very energetic learner thing. My question comes back. You have this freedom about you. Many people Paul and I have talked to over this period and outside of the podcast, there's this burnout factor. There's this overwhelm of like, I'm now picked this course and I will be on this course for 30 or 40 years. It is this freedom that you've picked. Do you think that's helped with your burnout? Do you think it's helped with you to be able to live a more free life around that?
Yes. Simple answer is yes. And I think, I remember doing a podcast a couple years ago, which it was called Sharp Conversations. And I remember, I think that the woman had started that because someone close in her life had, how do I put it, had faced, whether just from burnout or other things contributing, had ended taking their own life. And it was kind of a hard thing for her to talk about. But I think the point was that we've talked about burnout in specifics. I think the biggest reasons that people run into burnout is in the field of medicine is lack of autonomy in a ever-growing situation with more demands and more kind of restrictions to do what you spent all those years learning to do. And I think understanding you can't have freedom as a choice is a new age kind of thought. And since I've done this over the last 5 years, more people have started to go this direction. I do think that there's pros and cons on how this has all happened, but I'll try to keep this not too long. But if you think about it just historically, 100 years ago, people thought about medicine. They wanted to learn how to help people. And then you hit the 70s, 80s. This is now a calling. This is one of the few last professions in the world. That's what we were always kind of taught. And it might sound a little trite, but it does feel that way sometimes. It's not, you could go to graduate school, you could do other jobs, but medicine was a calling. You got called to practice. And I like that it's practice because you never master it, right? You always practice. But over the years, people did that. And what was it? You think about, the 50s, 60s, you were the general practice person, the GP. And when you're the general practitioner and you're doing all those things, you're working a lot. And that has been a big commentary. Growing up, I wasn't really close to my dad a lot of the time because he was busy working. And, over the last 20 years, now people are like, wait a second. First of all, I'm living longer. And it goes back to our whole conversation. Can I have more than one career in a lifetime? But also, is medicine a calling? Is it everything I'm going to do every single minute of every day? Or can I have a life outside of that? And so I think when people have now gone into medicine and that mindset has shifted for the younger generation that this is not an end all to work 120 hours a week, when they get out and they realize, oh man, that is the obligation that I'm facing, but I don't want that, you kind of do face more burnout. So that's why the total opposite direction on having freedom or creating that freedom and space for yourself really can make a difference. And I think for all jobs and everything people do, that's always the biggest problem with burnout. And, I think that was a great quote that you had read. And then I remember hearing that, and I remember writing that now, and it was great because it was one of the section leaders for the American Academy of Pediatrics that happens to be one of my mentors and the director of that NICU, who I won't call him out right now. But one thing about that too is that it also is similar to a mindset that I adopted about 5 years ago that I started asking my trainees, not just, freedom and creating freedom, but thinking differently. Right. And you and I have talked about that a lot. And I think my favorite kind of cheesy line that I bring up to people is, when I have a college student, med student, resident, or I have someone not in medicine that is asking me for advice or thoughts on career, I always tell them, everybody's going to tell you to think outside the box. But my question for you is to really ask yourself, is there a box? And I think that's one thing that is really been how I've reached that kind of mental freedom is I started kind of realizing that nothing is set in stone. There's a lot more fluidity to it. And it's really how you set yourself up, or if you really put the effort to go that direction. People are always going to have thoughts and tell you to do one thing or another. And just like I'm, giving advice to tell people to do one thing or another. And unfortunately, it's human nature to listen to the majority rule for some of those things. It's really easier to go in the path that is most traveled. But realistically, unfortunately, that is an old path, and it doesn't mean it's the right way to go. So it's one of those things that I think as the world's changing, as medicine's changing, I felt that finding freedom, finding autonomy was really critical to me facing burnout. And so it's really helped because it really brings you back to the heart of medicine, really brings you back to the heart of why you do the job you do. So yeah, I think that that's a great point, and a good thing to think about for everybody.
So I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you talk about, is there a box, and then I'm thinking, well, that's very Matrix-esque of you to say that.
Yeah,
and then I'm seeing your
exactly.
shirt that says Neo, and I'm like, you
Exactly, you get
Neo.
That's so funny. So I will tell you now that I'm in my neonatology fellowship, and I think about that a lot when I have this discussion with people about how you need to face the world with that mindset. I do sometimes say that, and that's one thing that drew me to neonatology. I think the word is super cool, but it's kind of a silly reason.
That's how you pick it. You pick it by the title. That's right.
Exactly. I do feel like Neo, and that is, you're the first person that has gotten that reference without me saying it. But in my mind, that is 1000% how I've started approaching the world. Is exactly that. We're all in a kind of structure that has us acting in the same circles, going a certain way, and breaking free from the matrix has always been kind of how I've approached it. And that's what I was able to do when I paid off my loans. Is I finally I took the right pill, right? I took the red pill, I took the right one, and I ended up on the other side.
Yeah.
But you didn't just end up there, Trevor. You made, I remember I was talking, and you made a conscious effort to go, hey, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do locums. I'm going to travel. And you picked the best time to do it because it was during COVID.
Yeah.
Right? Everything was locked down.
Yeah.
And you're like, this may not have been the right decision. I remember when you called, you're like, it's not working out exactly what I thought, but you walked through that more. Can you talk about that? Because there's going to be listeners that are going through this right now. They're either completing training or they're in the middle of it. And I remember you saying, I want to have the student loan paid off and I'm going to go at it hard. And we hear that a lot from people, but you walk that. Can you share that a little bit, that journey?
Yeah, I want to start with, and don't let me get too far away from that exact question, but I want to start with, I'm very conscious and aware of the fact that I started off my life in a good position. But that being said, I was told, no, don't do this multiple times. And so I don't have really sad story or something. But when I was in college, everyone said, you're going to go to Italy, and not work right after? I said, yes. When I was in residency, when I said I was going to do locum tenens, I'll never forget that my mentor, one of the hospitalists who had actually done locums and was the only one out of 100 doctors I'd ever met that had actually done them, he even said to me, hey, look, it might sound like a good idea, might sound like fun, but don't do it too much. And if you do, it's going to look like you're a flight risk on your resume, so just do it before you start another job as a bridge, if anything. Like I just was saying, it's really easy to listen to that advice and do that. But I decided pretty early on that was going to be a different route for me. What happened was, as a second year resident, and now I'm in Houston, I'm a pediatric resident. I was thinking about subspecializing in neonatology, but I also liked pediatric oncology, and I liked pediatric intensive care. Like you mentioned, all those things at the beginning. I wasn't sure. And so I decided to start off, and I'd heard about locum tenens. I'd heard about the ability to be a traveling or substitute independent contracting doctor. And so in the last 6 months before I graduated, I started talking to agencies and started looking more into it. And you're right. COVID hit in March of 2020. What did that do to me? Well, the world has seen that people got sick, and the world has seen that in the adult population, when COVID happened, people got hospitalized, people died. And not to minimize that, but in the world of pediatrics, as soon as COVID hit, when lockdowns started happening, there were two big things that affected the world of pediatric medicine. Number one, if you were healthy, parents didn't take their kids in for routine well child visits because, frankly, I hate to say this, but why? Your 3-year-old is thriving at home. Why would you take them to an area that you are worried about having contact with sick people? In general, people were also isolating, and that caused other repercussions down the line with people being really displaced from their regular immunization schedules and all that. But in general, most people were fine. Most kids will be fine if they don't go to the doctor. And that's a little, you can't say that too loudly because we'll be out of a business, out of a job, but it's true. And on top of that, kids stayed home from school, right? And so they didn't get sick. So all of that to explain that when I graduated now in July of 2020, these jobs as locum tenens that needed to be filled previously, there weren't a lot of them because the people that had permanent jobs at the hospital, at the clinic, well, guess what? They didn't have a lot of patients. And so they had to look for alternative work. And so they became my competition. Whereas prior to me graduating, there was a lot of jobs available and not a lot of doctors. When I graduated, there was a lot of doctors, not a lot of jobs. And you can imagine a new graduate, I was not able to compete with some of those other doctors. So when I graduated in July 2020, what that means is I lived paycheck to paycheck. I mean, a full-fledged doctor at this point, right? An attending pediatrician. I lived paycheck to paycheck for about 6 or 7 months because I would pick up jobs here and there. There was one locum job that I was lucky to have. And at that job, I only was able to work a couple days a month that they needed me. And so I kind of limped along at this point. And I thought so many times, oh, man, this wasn't the right path. And maybe I should go and take a permanent job instead of doing locum tenens work. And, I just held out a little bit longer. And then I got a phone call in, I think, February of 2021 that said, hey, there's a job. The world is starting to open back up for medicine because people are not isolating as much anymore. They can't. Kids are getting sick. Do you want to go to Maine? And I said, yes, let's go to Maine. And that was, again, the start of branching me out and just pushed me. It gave me a little bit of fuel to keep going. And, one of my favorite quotes and my favorite things I've started to really ask myself lately, because it has been very hard to still be in training. But as I have 306 days left of my fellowship, as we talk today, I think of what Andy Dufresne said to Red in Shawshank Redemption. When Red gets out of prison, and, I don't know if you guys remember this, right? You might be too young, but when he gets out of prison and he goes to the brick wall where Andy Dufresne had left a tin can, and he tells him how to get there. And, Morgan Freeman, who plays Red, gets the tin can. And in the note, it says, if you've made it this far, maybe you're willing to go a little further. And I keep thinking to myself, like, that was the mentality that I had when I didn't have work. And I was doing okay, but I really was paycheck to paycheck. And so I thought that. I kept going. It was 1 week more, one day more. And then all of a sudden I got work and the world just changed again.
I love that movie, first of all. So the fact that you're able to reference it, you're young. You've referred to us as being, oh, maybe we're too young. We were there when
he is used to work pediatrics. Used to talking to children. So
that's right.
Yeah. His judge is a little off right now.
Yeah. Well, I act like a child a lot, so maybe that's why.
Sorry, hopefully that wasn't too far away from your question.
Oh, this is perfect. It's perfect. I think no, this is part of your storytelling, right? We can give people facts all the time, just like you do with a parent about their child. You can give them the name of the medicine. You can give them the here's what you do and what time. But if they don't have something to anchor it with, then it's going to be very difficult for them to remember. Right. And Paul and I have talked about this a whole bunch. Like, who's going to listen to this podcast? It's going to be people that are walking into the hospital at 3 a.m. They're trying to walk outside and get a little bit of daylight because they've just pulled a 24-hour shift. It's someone who's going that, or let me just find out what's going on from my peers. And so there's going to be someone who's going to remember that movie or they haven't seen it. And once they get done watching, they're going to go back and say, Dufresne talked about this, right? He had planned out. But I love the fact as well as At some point prior to going to jail, Andy Dufresne went and put that into a right. I mean, there's thought processes that happen through all this stuff. And every time I've talked to you, Trevor, it's been this excitement in your voice to learn something more. And I was listening to you talk about this semi-professional line dancing. But what I found was interesting is many times when we talk to someone and we say, what do you do, or how you, whatever it is, they lead with, hey, here's my title. Here's what I do professionally. You just said I have a whole group of people that don't even know I'm a doctor. And what I love about you and visiting with you and the excitement is that there's this story of your life that is so much bigger than what I've chosen to how to earn a living and how to make this calling. But you're, as this individual in life, you're carving your own path, and you flow like, as Bruce Lee talks about, you flow like the water, that every time you kind of bump into something, you're like, oh, well, I'll just pivot over here. Oh, I'll go over. That's okay. Yeah. No, I'm going to go down a different path. And so this is why for years now, I've kept telling you, our listeners will love your story. And I think you're going to have a huge impact on people. Plus, through people going to your blog, they're going to get your wisdom through that as well. Because your written word, your spoken word is great, right? You go through and you can tell a story. Your written word, when you read that, when you write that book, definitely I'll be someone buying it from you, because the way you communicate your ideas through your written word is amazing as well.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I think that, my approach to life and where it's put me in medicine now, part of it is because I've just been wandering and trying to figure things out. And I think a lot of us are doing that. And I mean, that's another thing I would just say, I don't know how many people you guys have talked to that have run into this, but can you imagine you put in a decade of your life into college? That's a decade of college, sorry. Where you put in 20, 30 years and then you pop out and that's your first job. I mean, I was lucky. I worked in a pizza place when I was in high school. I worked in the pharmacy at CVS. But a lot of people I know, they did, think about it, elementary school, high school, undergrad, grad school, and then residency. And then they graduate and you just start your life. And I think a lot of us that have done that, for years we have our eyes set on the prize. The prize is to be a doctor, but you forget that your life starts after that. And that's something that I've tried to find, and I think my search for that has led to these ideas of freedom and autonomy. It's led to me challenging the dogma that I'm always faced with, and then it's built on itself, and it's been like a self-fulfilling prophecy, a self-fulfilling concept. As I kind of kept looking more doors opened, I started being able to see more. My favorite story ever is called Allegory of the Cave, and that's by Plato, I believe. It's, Greek mythology. And in it, what the story is really briefly is there's a bunch of people that are chained to a wall, facing the wall, and they're born and raised that way. This is obviously a fictional concept, but they're facing the wall, chained to it. And all they can see on the wall are the shadows of light behind them. So there's a cave, you're chained to the wall, there's light, and there's people, there's something behind them, but they can never see it. And they just keep staring at the wall their entire life. Just like the Matrix, you have no idea of what's actually behind you. You can't actually see it. And then when they break free from the chains, for the first time their entire life, they turn around, they can see what's casting these shadows on the wall, but they can't explain it to the people that haven't had their hands released. And so that's how, for me, as I've sought freedom, sought autonomy, and experienced it, I now have seen more and more. When I graduated residency in 2020, I did locums. And when I started doing locums, like I said, those first 6 months, I thought, shoot, I can't make ends meet. And then after I started getting more work in and I started refocusing and figuring out my financial situation, I got to a point where I was only spending 8 or 10% of my entire salary. And that says something about my saving, but it's also because my income and a lot of the nuances that I was able to figure out were just so spectacular. So it got me to a point where basically when I talked to another financial advisor, a friend of mine, I tell him when I graduated my residency in 2020, I sought freedom, I sought autonomy, and I wanted to pay my loans off. That was where my ceiling was. Let's pay the loans off. After I, outgrossed orthopedic surgery and I hit 7 digits in those 3 years. Instead I started to say, wait a second, I paid my loans off. And I remember talking to my friend Will, and I said, now I wonder if I can one of these days fly first class to Dubai. Like, I don't know, like it's reset my expectations for myself. But that's just all become kind of how I live now, I guess.
You keep addressing these changes in your life that seems like maybe the theme or the anthem of your life to this point has been to put yourself willingly in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah.
Even since we started talking about when you graduated college and then going overseas and then just continuing to put yourself there, which is sort of the opposite of what we might want to do. We want to be in comfortable situations, be at that homeostasis where everything's calm, but you're willingly putting yourself out there. And the thing is that that's where growth is inspired. You're not going to find growth staying within that neutral zone, that homeostasis, which are, yes, it's a place where we're looking for rest and we have to have that. But the fact that you've continued to put yourself in positions where you have the opportunity to grow, to see things differently so that you can view things differently, is just something that I'm continuing to see as this consistency throughout your stories. So it's great to hear that part of it. And I think that we all have to sort of search for that at some point, right? It is nice to get that rest, but if we don't, we're going to look back and we'll have just taken the steps. But I think also the other consistency that I'm hearing is, in the path of learning, we're always taught what to think. It's, even K through current, right? I mean, here's what you think. Very few of us run into that educator or that opportunity where they teach you how to think. How should I think of the world? Because then otherwise the question or even the statement of there is no box doesn't even occur, right? Because it's always a box. That's what I was told. There's this box, it exists. There's no inside, there's no outside. It's just the box. And this is where I live. And if you don't push yourself, if you don't give yourself the opportunity to learn, if you don't give yourself the opportunity to think, it's that outside the box is how do you even get outside of that? Some thinking just, I think, would be hard to even place those questions. How do I get outside of the box? That's how contained a lot of us have been, really in the path of any education, right? So it's kind of a tangent from that, but that's just sort of the consistency of what I'm hearing is being open to the uncomfortable to lead to the places where you really live and are experiencing what life has in store.
Yeah. And, to that end, I would say like a very kind of contradictory, although I live in a weird dichotomy in a lot of my personalities and decisions. I'm in my 26th year of school right now. When I have 300 days left of my 26th year of school. It is my 14th year of education after high school. But that being said, the contradictory part is I think it is really important that people know, and I think this has become a running and growing belief in rhetoric, is that you don't need formal education to succeed in things. You need the mentality of, like you said, like, is there, like, if I'm inside a box, like, how do I even approach getting to the point of thinking you can get outside of the box, let alone, to my question of if there is a box, you have to start somewhere. Risk it. You got to risk it for the biscuit, right? as they always say. But yeah, I think that it is true. We all practice and live our lives in ways that we've been taught, we've been influenced. One favorite phrase of mine, and there is a blog post on this, is that you are a mosaic of everybody you've ever met. I just thought I overheard someone saying that once at a coffee shop, and I thought that is just brilliant. But it is true. There's a larger part that is influencing our lives if there's direct people that are teaching us, and we tend to do those things. So yeah, it's not every time that you're encouraged or asked how to think. I felt that when I was in high school, to really push that back, I had some mentors that really did influence asking me like how I thought more than what I thought about. And that might be part of that influence, and part of it might have just been my experiences have really brought that out for me. But it's a really, really good point. that's kind of been what I've built my life on now. But it encourages, once you get to that point, it's like an exponential thing, because when you start to say to yourself, I should ask myself how to think, not what to think, you also start to ask yourself new questions you didn't think about.
Yeah.
And it's been a cool experience.
So to just kind of catch up to the time frame, you're out doing locum tenens, and then now you're back in fellowship training again. What was the inspiration to do that?
Yeah, so I think for most people, the average medical student takes on between, I think it's like probably $250,000 to $400,000 in debt, even higher if you're going to some osteopathic schools or some medical schools in the Caribbean. And so for me, I had $315,000 when you looked at all the interest that accrued, and that's between a private and a federal loan. So when I graduated in 2020, at the time, and it still exists now, although I think with the current changes, I'm not sure how long it will last, but there's a program called the PSLF, for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness, where, you pay 120 payments and you can do it at an income-based amount. But then after that, if you have a remaining loan, that's forgiven. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening might know about that. Well, when I was in residency, I remember being a first-year resident, an intern, and I remember asking my chief resident if she was doing the PSLF plan, and she said, no, I'm not. And as an intern, I was like thinking in my head, that's so stupid. Why wouldn't you? Your loans are forgiven. And she said, it's not necessary if you just pay your loans off. And I just thought in my head, like, at the time I didn't sit down and do the numbers. It didn't make sense to me. But then when I graduated, I started to realize that there was some truth to that. We all have golden shackles when we finish residency. When you finish residency training, you have to be a doctor. There's not that many fields that are going to pay enough to pay off your loans. And to do the public service loan forgiveness, that's at least 10 years. And so when I did locum tenens, it's a multifactorial thing as to why. I like the freedom, like we've already talked about. I like the ability to travel. I also didn't know where I wanted to live. I didn't think I wanted to stay in Houston. Another big part that was really something you can't avoid was that financially, because I was being asked to go to places that were less desirable, because I was being asked to do things that were not really what everyone wanted to do, they pay more. And because I didn't have a lot of responsibilities, and because my goal was that I didn't like feeling this debt over my head, I hit it very aggressively. And so I paid off that $315,000 in under 3 years. And I remember talking to even my best friends to this day. They say, wait a second, what's your interest on your loans and your debt? You could make a 10% return, hopefully, if you're investing in the stock market or investing in real estate or something, and then you just pay the minimum, and in the big picture, everything works out. Well, I didn't like that idea. I wanted to not have it loom over my head. And also, I made a good decision, because during COVID in the last 5 years, with the stock market being all over the place, I really think it was more effective that I paid off my loans. And so I start with all that because really, after I paid off all my loans, I remember thinking to myself, shoot, now what? Like I said earlier, we're on this path to be doctors. We finished residency, and I think a lot of people might hit some sort of crisis where they're like, okay, I went through all of this. I'm finally at my end point, but the reality is it's not the end point. It's a starting point for something else. But the starting point is to pay off your loans. For me, when I got to that point much faster, instead of being in my later 40s and now being loan free, I was loan free much earlier, right? And I said to myself at the time, I'm like, okay, now that I'm loan free, like, what am I living for? What do I want to do with myself? And it goes back to the start of all this, our whole conversation. I knew that I wanted to work with really intense, critical situations. I learned by my ability for communication. And Chris had brought up my written or spoken word. Hopefully my spoken word is appreciated by people out there. I don't know. But I learned that all those factors, things that contributed, led me towards wanting to specialize in taking care of sick and premature babies. They can't talk at all. And it was really from a concept and a foundation of medicine. If you don't make it past being a baby, you're not going to be a child or an adult. There's parts where we are at the edge of technology. I mean, I'm doing stuff in my training program right now that is like monumental. we're doing things and we come across cases that are 1 in a million. My particular training hospital, there's only 40 of them that do what we do in the whole country. And so when you look at that from an international level, when you look about the world moving forward, it's a very interesting, unique place to be. Now, I don't see myself as a researcher. And so, some of that future contribution will be not something I'm probably actively doing at a research level, but I'll hopefully be contributing towards lives that can go on to do whatever. You said that you had a child that's interested in culinary medicine or interested in food or medicine or any of the combination. And, maybe one of the babies I take care of will get there one of these days, or maybe one of them will be, God, I don't want to say the next politician at this point, but we'll go on to do something great, right? So it led me to a point where when I'd paid off loans and I thought about what I wanted to do, I came back to what I really enjoyed in residency. Among all those subspecialties that had critical thinking, critical conversations, really intense vulnerability, neonatal intensive care was where I kind of like set myself. I also, frankly, didn't know what I wanted to do as far as where I wanted to live. And so I decided to go back and apply to fellowship in 2022 to start 2023 because, frankly, I knew it would force me to sit still for 3 years. And it would make me sit still and try to think to myself, what is the next step? And so now I'm 2/3 of the way through and I'm getting closer to figuring that out. But it's still something that I kind of have to re-engage with every now and then as I move forward. So yeah, I think the plans were always at some point in the back of my mind to go to medicine, to go to med school. And then once in med school, the plans were always something pediatrics. And then even when I graduated and was working as a pediatrician, I think that there was always a part of me that was going to say, hey, you should be in neonatal intensive care. And since then, I've dealt with some very, very intense situations. I get the privilege of being present and being part of and affecting some of the most substantial moments in the entire lives of people. It's been really gratifying to do that too. And I know that there are some families out there where, whether for good or for bad, because a lot of times it might be bad, I'm going to be part of their story for the rest of their entire life. And when they write their own book, I wonder if I'll be part of that. So that gets down to the heart of medicine, right? And like why any of us do it. I don't think anybody that goes into medicine wants to get burned out. I don't think anybody that goes into medicine is doing it just for the money. We do it for all those other parts of working with humans. And like, my high school valedictorian, who's a good friend of mine, James Shee, he said in our high school speech, he said, hey, go and light the world on fire. And, I think that's become part of what I also think drives me. And so, yeah, going back to fellowship was something that I wanted to do. I wasn't satisfied being a general pediatrician. And I'll be totally honest, maybe I won't be satisfied just being a neonatologist. Maybe it won't be enough. Maybe I'll take on some other jobs. And that's why Chris and I have talked about, other business interests, other goals, because I hope that there's more that I can do outside of what I'm doing. And that's been kind of a testament towards the culinary medicine part, the language, the line dancing. For me, it's all like an accumulation of those things to make this kind of complex person, hopefully.
Yeah. When you were leading into the story of why you chose neonatology and your focus on other languages and communication, I thought you were going to say that you had cracked the code on baby talk and you were going to be able to talk like the baby whisperer or something.
I am also a baby whisperer. I am also a baby whisperer.
What is that? Okay. Yeah, I know. Well, I don't think that someone like yourself would stop pursuing it. It's become a lifelong thing to continue to find that pursuit and passion. So that really leads me to my next question, which is what advice would you give to a young physician who's maybe torn between career choices, between maybe medicine or even something outside of medicine?
Everybody that gives you advice is going to do it from what their experiences have taught them. And a majority of people have only a certain amount of experiences. So I think that being open to the world and being open to advice and thoughts and critiques and commentaries from multiple people is critical. I think that traveling is important, not just from a physical and a regional standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint, emotional standpoint. Thinking again, like if there is a box, has always been my approach, and I think that it's really been helpful. And then when you do think to yourself, hey, should I go somewhere different? Should I do something uncomfortable? You should also ask yourself, how did I get here? I think it's really, really important that everybody looks back on their life. I said it earlier, but I didn't say where it came from. Steve Jobs gave a speech to 2002, I think, at Stanford commencement. And what he said was, you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. When I have done that, it has reinforced what I'm doing going forward. I'm more comfortable going forward and doing something I haven't done because I've been there before. Anybody that's listening, if they're, medical trainees, they've done a lot to get there. We all have imposter syndrome, but you did something to get where you're at. And, it's okay if you didn't, and maybe you're going to figure out a different path. But I think those are some really important things that will craft a life that you're happy with. Everyone's going to face burnout, and being able to find spaces for autonomy, find spaces for freedom are really, really critical. And I know we didn't have time to dive into it too much, but with the locum tenens tract, one thing that really stood out to me, I worked in almost 10 states over the last 5 years. And one thing that really stood out to me is medicine is medicine is medicine. It's all the same no matter where you go. And really the thing that will influence and affect people for the future is learning how to connect with humans on that level. When Miss Ingram told me when I was a 16-year-old high school student in my dad's office that my dad saved her life, and I spoke at his funeral to talk about it, someone said to me, he saw something beyond what people said. He saw who they were as humans. And I think that doing that is, where the cheesy part is of finding out why you went into medicine. To avoid burnout, you have to come back to asking yourself why you're doing this, and really realizing that and understanding that really makes it more worthwhile. Visiting with patients and spending time with patients makes that really important. Having self-awareness for these things is really critical. And I guess the last thing, which I hate to say it, but I wish I knew more on how to use AI because that's where things are really going.
Yeah, that's a slippery slope, isn't it? Want to know how it works and then kind of almost wish it wasn't there. I think we're all in for a surprise, but that's another show altogether, right?
Sure.
Well, the title of the show is The Patient Physician. And so the last question we have for you is what does that mean to you?
The patient physician. When I first thought it, I thought of like more patients, which I think really people should think of it that way. I know that wasn't really the intention, but you need to have patience. Patience for everyday things, but patience for your life. Patience to think that the world and your life might kind of end up where it needs to be for the right reason. I ended up in a room recently to deliver very bad news, and the dad said to us, we made decisions a couple years ago, and we decided to come here, and this is why we made that decision. And we didn't know it at the time. I think that's really important. And then also from where I believe it actually is intended as a patient, right, as a human, to know that even though you're a physician, you don't know everything. Even though I've spent the last decade going down the route of medicine, it has taught me that I know less and less than I thought about medicine. The more that I learn, the more I know that there's so much I don't know, which also brings me back to realize that I'm human like anybody else. The patient, right? I'm a patient just like you, just like the babies I take care of, just like my family members, which is why, I don't think that highly of myself most days. I mean, that's why I don't tell my country line dance friends what I do. And I don't tell people like that I like to cook because I learned about culinary medicine. I do these things because I'm human, just like anybody else. And it's reasonable and real and normal and should be normalized to have those feelings, to have those ups and downs, to realize that we are all lost, that we are all facing burnout in different ways, and trying to figure out what our purpose is. So I think there's a lot of things you could say about the name. I like the name, the patient physician. I think that hopefully this talk is like kind of been towards that intention, but I would say it humbles me and makes me realize that at the end of the day, we're all kind of on the same journey. We're on different parts of it, but that's interconnectedness, and that's why I do what I do.
Thank you, Dr. Cabrera, the Nomadic Pediatrician. You can find him at the nomadicpediatrician.com. I really enjoyed visiting with you today and your thoughts. And I would just end by saying, may the force be with you.
I'm glad you like these. This is New Orleans art right there.
Yeah, now I know why you're so wise. I can see Yoda right above your head.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks, Chris. It's been awesome.
Thanks, Trevor.